hit record. Let's get going now.
It's the Six Show. It's the Six Show. It's the Six Show.
Welcome everybody to the Schick Show. I'm here today with my esteemed guest. I'm using big $5 words now because, you know, I've got 5 or 6 people that actually listen to me. But someone who has lived a lot life has to offer, who has a list of accomplishments that continues to grow, but includes 2 undergraduate degrees, a master's, a doctorate, 43 years as a full-time pastor, currently operates a multi-million-dollar construction business that builds and remodels Planet Fitness gyms.
Yes. Up and down the East Coast.
All right. Currently has been making knives for a few years. I just got my hands on a few of them, guys. These things are just incredible. Just simply beautiful pieces of art in my eyes. But I think you're most proud of, and I've known you long enough to know that I think your most proud accomplishment is your family.
Oh, yeah.
Which includes his wife, Julie, and 4 children, which are Kristen, Ben, Ashley, and Lauren. Wow. I'm out of breath just talking about it. You've lived it.
Yeah, we've had a lot of blessings in life, and 4 kids, the oldest one's 41 now, and the youngest is 24. So they've all gone through the stages of adolescence to adulthood, and I love when they come home and they say, "Dad, this adulting is tough,"
Well, everybody, wherever you're at, give Mr. Gary Hall a round of applause, wherever you're listening at. And I got listeners that listen while they're getting ready in the morning and driving in the car, and some of them are sneaking it in at work, I've heard. And I've got a cousin that he listens while he's at lunch. My wife listens while she bike rides.
Outstanding.
And I actually do listen to them so I can go back, and it's kind of like, and I'm sure you've done this, with all your work you've done, you go back and you look at your own work and you pick it apart. I'm always picking apart. We were just talking just now about how, my first few podcasts, I wouldn't wear headphones. And now I do, so I know that I'm up on my mic and stuff like that. Man, where do we begin?
Wherever you want to, that's.
Well, how's the family?
Family's doing great. Julie and I have been married for a number of years now, so we've learned how to tolerate each other, and even days where we enjoy each other, which is even better than that. But we got married a number of years ago when she was an accountant, and we were married for about a year or so. She said, she came home one day, she said, "I'm tired of being an accountant after 16 years of accounting." And I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" She said, "My grandmother was a nurse. I think I want to be a nurse." So I said, "Okay." We were living outside of Lafayette at the time, and there were 3 nursing schools in the area.
Yeah.
And so we looked at the 3 of them, and I said, if you want to be a nurse, here's your opportunity. You're not going to get much closer to a nursing school. We were 8 minutes from Purdue University, and I used the P word lightly, So,
oh, man.
But so 2 weeks later, she gave her resignation to the accounting firm and started nursing school, and it was going to be a 3-year adventure, and it was. And living on one salary and doing the stuff we were doing and having a baby and all that fun stuff that goes along with that. And then after she got her nursing degree at St. Elizabeth School of Nursing, she came and said, I think I wanted to get my bachelor's degree, which was 20 minutes away. And I said, "Okay, what is that?" She said, "Another year." I said, "Okay, we can do that." Yeah. And after that year, she came home and she said, "I think I want to be a nurse practitioner." I said, "Okay, gosh. What is that?" And she said, "Oh, that's 3 more years." And so I said, "Well, we'll eat beans and potatoes, until we get through this." And, then we had another kid, and, it just kept going. And but she loves what she does, and that makes for
awesome.
A happy family.
Well, that's what Jennifer does. My wife is also a nurse, and it's interesting you bring that up. It just kind of brought back a lot of memories, because we had those conversations, and at the time she was working at I think I think she may have been working at the health department here in town, and she already had her bachelor's. She had a bachelor's in dietetics, never pursued it. Um, then come home and one day she said, "Hey, I'm really interested in getting my nursing degree, and I said, let's do it. She said, can we afford to go back? Can we afford for me to go back to school?" And my comment to her, and this was, a really young Scott. I must have been, we'd just had our first baby. So we must have been 24-ish, 23, 24. And my response to her was, if we're asking that question, we have to. It's what we have to do. If we're asking the question, can we afford it? Can we afford to chase our dreams and the things we want? We got to. And what's interesting is same thing, a lot of sacrifice, um, a lot of ramen. You know?
Yeah, but those are the fun times to
Oh,
get
man.
through, and
It's that struggle that is so precious.
and after two bachelors and a master's, after Julie went back to get her nurse practitioner degree, I said, if you're going to be laying on the living room floor studying every night for 3 or 4 hours, I might as well go back and get my doctorate and lay down next to you, and we can, rather than being out of sync, you finish yours and then I go back to get
Yeah.
my doctorate. Let's get it done at the same time. And so
That's awesome.
7 years later, at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, it was done.
It's a grind. It's sometimes I wonder, and I'd considered pursuing my doctorate at one point, and a lot of the conversation was, it's grit. It's grit. You gotta push through that. It shows what type of person you are to be able to fight through those hard times, to fight through those times you don't want to study. That you're like, I'm already doing something I really enjoy and love anyway. And man, congratulations on that. That's a huge accomplishment. I'd looked at one point, and I think it's somewhere less than 1% of the population in the U.S. has a doctorate. I may be wrong. So, but I think that was what it was. And I've said on other podcasts, I wish I had an intern. If I can find an intern, I will get one that will look up stuff like this for
That's
me.
right. Yeah, you can do a fact checker for you. So where you're looking, I'll tell a story. I came home after getting my doctorate, and I'd go to 4 to 6 weeks a year out in Pasadena and study 8 hours a day in classes, and then in the off time you had to do working papers and like 6,000 pages to read every month. I mean, it was a pretty good assignment. And I got my doctorate. And I came home and I said to my wife, "You can call me Dr. Hall now." And she said, "Well, I wouldn't hold my breath on that." And I don't think she's ever called me Dr. Hall, So,
Well, I almost did when I introduced you, and I thought, I know some people who like they want it.
Oh, yeah.
They want to be called doctor. And hey, you've earned it. And no problem with that. If that's their preferred way of going about it. But I have others, I think, such as you, that's like something I hold. I didn't know that until the other day when you text me. I appreciate that you don't have to parade it around.
Oh no,
And not that I think others do. I'm not saying that at all. But it just shows how humble you are and what type of a servant you are.
It opens some doors in academia that if you don't have it, people talk down to you instead of talking to you, because they see you as a lesser species of human being. And because you're not as educated as they are, that just shows their stupidity, really.
It's unfortunate.
But a few years ago, my son and I started a construction business, and 9 years ago, and commercial. And I retired early so that I could help run the business. We build and remodel Planet Fitness stores up and down the East Coast. We've gone as far as Kansas City, as far as Maine, down to the edge of Florida. But we also remodel strip mall stores for Tanger outlets, for Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein.
I knew about that part.
Yeah, that umbrella
we talked about
company.
that before,
And but we got a job a few years ago in Portland, Maine, and we had 4 jobs going. My son and 3 other foremen were running those, and he said, "Dad, I need you to go to Maine." I said, for how long? And he said, I don't know, 7, 8, 10, 12, 13 weeks. And we were building a BioLife plasma store there for, at that time, the fastest bio plasma store in America, company. And it was actually out of Australia. And but they had the shell done, and we went in and did everything else on the inside. And I was working with a young man from North Carolina, uh, and my son had told him I was retired pastor and, Dr. Hall, and we were hanging drywall together. And he looked at me. He said, "What do I call you?" And I said, "Well, most people call me Gary." And he said, "No." He said, "Do I call you Reverend?" I said, "No." I said, "Because if we're in a group of people and you call me Reverend, they're going to be scattering, so the moment they hear that, because they have some preconceived notions."
Sure.
And he said, "Well, I'll just call you Dr. Hall." And like 7, 8 years later, every time I talk to him, he says, "Dr. Hall, how you doing?"
Oh, that's awesome.
And I'm thinking, you know, here's a guy who doesn't have a high school education and
Yeah.
about half of his teeth, but he's a hell of a worker,
Right.
and he works hard, and we appreciate him, and pay him well and take care of our guys.
Yeah.
Most of our guys are still with us after 9 years, and so that speaks well of our company.
Yeah.
So,
That's
but
awesome.
the fun part about that business is I don't go on the road anymore, which is good. And then secondly, um, we take a tithe off of the business and help start millennial churches.
Okay.
And that was the agreement with my son, was when we started this venture, that you can make a living doing about anything, legal or illegal. But you don't necessarily make a life or help other people when
Yeah.
you're making a living. Some people don't. And so I said, I'll come up with the funds that we need to start a commercial construction company, which was pretty salty. And but we're going to tithe on that business, and we're going to start new millennial churches. And so we've been able to start 4, and we have about 1,600 worshipers in those campuses.
Wow.
And I don't do any of the work. I just help provide the funds
Yeah.
with other people to get those things going, because millennials are the biggest population group in America, but they're the most unchurched. So, when I get tired of doing business, I have to look past the business to what we're accomplishing in the world, and changing lives. When you reach 1,600 people for Christ over 6, 7 years,
Yeah.
that's more than I could do in 6 or 7 years as a working pastor.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
it's been pretty neat.
So when you say millennial church, what do you mean by that? Because I'm sure there's plenty of people out there right now that are going, "What's a millennial church?"
Well, I have 2 millennials in my family, which are different than the 2 older kids, because there's about 7 years difference between them. And so you get them all together, and they have different value systems, they listen to different music, they like different foods. I mean, each generation sort of makes its mark on the culture on the basis of who they are. And I had a guy in my knife shop a while back, and he has a son, and his son, he was having some problems connecting with his son, and they'd always got along. And he said, how do I connect with my son? And I said, when your kids are growing up, they want to be like you. And then once they get to know you, they don't want to be like you. I was messing with him a little bit.
Right.
And I said, so, you have this appreciation stage where they want to be like you. And then you have this differentiation stage where they want to be different. Now, that could be negative or positive. They could be acting out. It could be 1,000 different things. But it doesn't mean he doesn't love you. He just wants to be different than you. And then in being different from you, he can be himself. And then he can move on to adulting and deciding what is the best self that he can be. But you got to let him be different. You can't keep your thumb on him and make him just like you. So millennials are a different generation than Gen Xers
Sure.
or baby boomers at one time was the biggest generation in America, and they made their mark on the world.
Sure.
And then you have their children who are more like their grandparents than their moms and dads. And Gen Xers and millennials are, they're just different,
I see that just today. Our girls are very similar in age. Well, Lauren, I don't know Ashley,
Yeah.
and I don't know your older children either. So,
I don't know them either, but
okay,
I
that's
still
fair
claim
enough.
them.
So Addison was here today, and she had sent me a text. She was coming from Fort Wayne, and her and Joss live in Muncie. So she's coming back from Fort Wayne. She said, "Hey, I need you to check my car out." And I'm like, "Okay, period." That's just how I text. And she said, "Hey, do you know you put capital K period on that text?" And I said, "Okay. Do you have any idea what difference is between okay and K period?"
It's not how they communicate.
It's not. So what I found out was capital K period is an annoyed okay. I don't speak text, right? And it's just interesting, like what you're saying, both my girls, and it's interesting because my girls are only 3 years apart, but they fall into Gen Z and millennial. It's very interesting to watch their differences, and I saw it, and Jennifer sees it with her siblings as well. My siblings, I'm born in 74. My siblings are all born in the 60s. They're culturally, they're a little bit, they see things differently than I do. And
Correct.
I've told the story before where I wasn't afraid to talk back to my elders,
Right.
where my brother would, I don't know, they would have imagined telling my Uncle Bob to stop talking and let somebody else have a chance, but I was that
Yeah,
guy.
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
I wasn't afraid to correct my parents on something. And
What's that whippersnapper? No,
right,
yeah, that's right.
exactly. So I can remember being somewhere where I called, and my Aunt Carol and Uncle Bob. Well, I've called them Carol and Bob or Aunt Carol and Uncle Bob, but it's not as formal. There's formal language that has happened in the past where such as miss someone. It was a very Southern thing, but I called them Carol and Bob, and one of my relations was like Aunt Carol, Uncle Bob, and I said, "Okay, cousin," you know.
Right.
Just who I am in that generation I grew up
Yeah.
in. And, I was very blessed to have parents that grew up in the 50s and were incredible people.
Right.
They allowed me to grow and be who I was. And I was thinking about, you were talking to that gentleman about his child. For the past 9 years, I've been with junior high students.
Mm-hmm.
And they're at the dawn of that social awareness. Adolescence is that time when you're no longer trying to please your parents. You're still there with it, but you're starting to pull away and realize I'm my own person. I'm not them. I'm not tied to them. I have my own feelings. I have my own thoughts. I have my own creativity. And I always thought that was interesting. That's why I love being a junior high principal and teacher. I really enjoyed that age group and loved that time I spent with them. I still connect with quite a few of the kids, and
Right.
I just had one on the show here a while back, and he was 14, getting ready to be a freshman, and Chris was like, I said, "Are you scared? Are are you nervous about becoming a freshman and moving into the high school?" And he goes, "Yeah, I am." And he was just that anxiety, but also that I'm ready to move forward. I think generationally we do struggle with that. Boy, my conversations with my dad were not always not always great. Same thing with my kids and me, and
Right.
it's fun to watch that. So just thinking as you were talking, how do you end up in Hartford City?
How did I end up in Hartford City? I asked myself that a lot of times, So we've been in Blackford County for 21 years.
Okay.
So I started out at 20 as evangelist in the Southern Baptist denomination. A lot of Calvin, a lot of hellfire and brimstone, and turn and burn and all that kind of stuff, And And I spent 5 years as an evangelist in the Southern Baptist denomination, traveled all over the Midwest, East Virginia, preaching and teaching every weekend
Yeah.
the basics of the Christian faith, and went to a Baptist liberal arts college, but my dad's side of the family were Southern Baptist. My mother's side were Methodist.
Okay.
So we would go to hear Calvin on Sunday mornings, in a suit and tie, which was like a straitjacket to a little kid, And thank God for lifesavers, because that's the only thing that saved my life. My mom would keep feeding me lifesavers, to be quiet. And but on Sunday nights, a lot of Sunday nights, my mother was a Methodist. We'd go to this little Methodist chapel, and we'd hear this Wesleyan theology, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, and a lot of times they were older retired pastors serving these little parishes and churches. And when I got to Bible college, my peers were like, "Weren't you confused hearing one major theological side, Calvin, in the morning, and hearing another theological side, Wesley, in the evenings?" And I said, "No, because I was predestined to work out my salvation with fear and trembling. We just eclectic and put it all together, like a theological soup." And when I finished my undergraduate work, one of my best friends was going to a Methodist seminary in Dayton, Ohio, and working in some student churches in Muncie District of Indiana. And so he said, "Hey, we need pastors up here, good pastors up here bad." I said, "Well, you don't need me. I'm not a good pastor." And but he talked me into coming up and meeting with the leadership here, and the superintendent of that area took me around, and he showed me three different student small church pastorates, and he said, "You can drive from here to Dayton and go to school. You have a working job here at a local church." And he said, "What's it going to take to get you up here? Jim's already vouched for you." And I said, "So do I get to take all three churches?" And it was like the bells and whistles and lights are going off in his head. I don't have to find two more pastors if I can get him to take all three. And so I said, "Yeah, I want all three." I'm used to preaching 4, 5, 6 times every weekend. So,
wow.
that's no problem. And
How old were you at this point?
24, 25.
Okay.
And so I had a lot of spit and vinegar and
Oh, yeah.
energy. And so I'd go out and preach at one church at 9 o'clock and another church at 10 o'clock on the way back
gosh.
in to where we were living in sort of the home church. And then had 11 o'clock service there. And one of the churches we closed. One of the churches tripled its size, and one of the churches doubled its size.
Wow.
So they only left me there for 3 years, and so they started moving me around the state because they would send me to the churches that were declining and dying and say, "Revive this church, let's do a turnaround situation." And so I served 6 different settings, and all of them grew between 300 and 500%.
Wow.
And so that was the fun opportunity. I didn't get involved in the politics or the administration or the major leadership of the church, but reaching people, educating people, training people, teaching people, and helping people find freedom. So 21 years ago, they called me and said, "Would you come to Hartford?" And well, when you work under a bishop, it's not "Would you like to go?" It's like, "Guess what? You're moving in July. Go home and tell your wife and kids." So you don't have a whole lot of choice in the matter. And so we came here. It's about 50 or 60 in a downtown county seat type church. And 15 years later, when I retired out, we had recovery ministry running 60 to 100. We had a morning traditional service, about 100, and an off-site campus at the high school. Eventually moved to one of the elementary schools with 60 to 100. So, we about tripled our size
Mm-hmm.
in that period of time, and that's the fun part. So that's how I got here, and so each year when my kids would change, like from elementary school to middle school to high school, I would just go to the leadership of the church and say, "Hey, this is not an annual renewal. I need to be here 4 years to get my kid out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want them changing high school mid
Yeah.
career in high school education, and then the next one came along and had 4 years in middle school and then another 4 years in high school. And so that's what we negotiated out. And since we were growing and expanding, and the leadership of the Methodist Church at that time was pleased with
Yeah.
that growth model. So they just left me here. I prefer being ignored by them. So
Well, that was one of my big questions was, how much moving around was required, through that, I don't know, through the career. I mean,
yeah,
it's more than a career.
usually you were moved. At one time, 50 years ago, you moved every 3 years, period.
Interesting.
And so, if you had kids, it was hard
Yeah.
because they had to keep making new relationships about every 3 years. And I was at Otterburn in Lafayette for 8 years. And so I tried to stretch about 6 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Student pastorates are normally short because they want to get you in and out and moving through
Yeah.
their system, and growing the church. So
Something you said earlier kind of struck me, because it's something that I've always struggled with my own faith, my own spirituality, and um, from my upbringing, uh, there's always the voice that is saying, "Follow the book, just follow the book, just follow the book. It's in the book. It's written." And then there's the other voice that is going, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" Right? And I thought about that for a long time. I really wrestled with it. But then I had a moment as a teacher, where we're teaching about Martin Luther, and him posting on the church doors, and the formation of the Protestant church, and it was a protest.
yeah,
And it was just like it struck me all of a sudden. I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I miss? What part of that did I miss that I could have probably answered a lot of questions I had about my own internal struggle? But do you find that? Do you find that within yourself? Do you still have a wrestling match with spirituality and faith? In 43 years as a pastor in your life, you talked about going to church as a young man and your entire life. Is it still a wrestling match?
I don't wrestle too much anymore. I'm too old to wrestle.
I'm still trying, Gary. I'm still
I'd
trying.
rather carry a pistol and shoot you than wrestle with you. What the hell? Wrestling's for the younger guys, I think. But no, I spent 7 years pre-Christian running and gunning, and that was in the late 60s or early 70s. And there was a lot of stuff out there to get into, and I tried to get into as much of it as possible without going into too much detail. And so the amazing grace and love of God just sort of found me, and it just transformed my life. And I've realized that what I was throwing in the hole of my life wasn't filling it up, but God's big enough to fill up any hole in your life, in your heart, your mind, your spirit, and you let Him in, and He'll fill up all the voids. You don't have to, and then you can allow that to overflow out of you what God has given to you and is giving to you, uh, and an understanding of grace. Um, you know, God, when He saves us and forgives us, never changes. We're up and down, in and out, roundabout. I tell some people they're like a fart in a whirlwind, they're all over the place. But, you know, God's relationship with us is based through the cross of Christ. And God established it that way because it never changes. His love is displayed to us on the cross. I love you enough to take your sins away. I love you enough to forgive you. And that forgiveness never changes. Sometimes we're good, sometimes we're bad, and sometimes we're ugly. That's part of the human nature. We're always struggling with that selfish sin nature.
Mm-hmm.
But God doesn't change, and His attitude doesn't change, and His contract with us in Christ doesn't ever change. He's changeless. And realizing that changed my life. And I missed it more times than I made it. God never changed.
Sure.
And, when God wanted to discipline me over something He didn't like in my life that wasn't a good representation of Him or the faith, He would look at me and He would say to me, "You're better than that. Not you dirty, rotten, filthy, good for nothing,
Right.
peckerhead, sinner.
Oh.
He would look at me and He'd say, "Gary, you're better now. Why are you settling for this when I created you to be this?" And He gave you a vision of what He created you to be. And, I tell people all the time, you give a kid a little 1 penny sucker and then try to take it away from them, you're going to have hell on your hands, man. You're going to be wrestling that kid on the ground, And I don't want to pull out my 9mm and shoot him, So I'm messing. Don't edit that out. Leave it in there, please. That's right. Yeah.
I edit very little.
But you know what? If you pulled out one of those big foot round suckers and said, "I'll trade you," you don't have to wrestle that kid for that little penny sucker.
Yeah.
He'll make that trade every time. And if you offer people the goodness and the love and the grace of God, God doesn't have to take anything out of your hands kicking and screaming. Because when you see what He has to offer you as opposed to what you're holding on to, you look at it, and you think, wow, this is nothing. He's everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you give it up.
It's interesting. You made a comment that you're better than that, and I had a guest on recently, Travis Jester, who was talking about his struggle with drug addiction. And when he had gone to jail, the night he had gone to jail, someone that he knew that worked at the jail said, "Oh, man, Travis, you're better than that." And that stuck with him. And he was sitting in that very chair, just a couple months ago, and we were having one of these conversations, and he was talking about how that changed everything about his recovery and, how it turned his life around. And I've heard that from many others, many, and we've all been through some sort of struggle, and it's that person, and that person or deity that is in your head that is saying you're better than that.
Yep.
And I think about that as I've been a disciplinarian, and I'm not comparing myself to God in any way, shape, or form, but I'm sharing an experience with some young kids that need someone to know that there's someone there to believe in them. One of the things I always try to do, and I was never perfect by any means, made lots of mistakes as a leader, but I always thought I just need to be consistent. I need to be never changing.
Amen.
Ever consistent. And I wanted to be that for the teachers that I was leading, for the communities that I was leading, and the children that I was being a mentor to. And that was a big thing for me. I wanted them to understand that no matter what, I'm going to be the same. And although I don't have a church background, I do know the principles that are in there of a faith-based life, and I try to utilize those as a leader, because I think a lot of our leadership, if not all, uh, I would say a lot, because if I say all, somebody's going, well, that's not in there, Scott.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I think um, much of what we're looking for in a leader, whether that be, a school or a church or, at the factory or, whatever you're doing, working at Taco Bell, as, just a shift person, you're looking for someone who's consistent, someone who's not going to change, that that when they turn that corner and you screw up, they're not gonna, you dirty rotten. They're gonna,
Right.
hey, come on now, you're
Yeah.
better than that.
Yeah.
That's why I brought you on, and that's what they're looking for. I think that's really really interesting, how much leadership psychology, how much leadership is based in, what was written, and the Bible was taught to me as the book of instruction before leaving Earth. That's how I look at the Bible and what I see it, and I want to thank a guy named Jake for that. And Jake, I've spoke to this guy in years, but when he had told me that, I thought that's really interesting. Just the things we pick up.
Yeah, you really wouldn't want to board a plane without a boarding pass. And that's the instruction manual of life. And a few years ago, I've always been an outdoorsman, loved hunting and fishing, and I ran into a guy in Blackford County, and he was really down because he didn't have a place to hunt. I said, well, come on, hunt with me. And he was not churched. And so I took him to a really marvelous hunting area for hunting, and a number of times. And then he looked at me one day and he says, okay, when's the shoe drop? How many times I'm going to have to go to church now because you took me
Right.
hunting? And
Right.
I said, really, we don't want you in our church. He looked at me like I slapped him. He said, what do you mean? I said, if you've got the attitude where you're going to go to church because you oughta, gotta, shoulda,
Yeah.
I said, I don't want you there. I want you there because you want to be there, not because I took you hunting and you're in my debt.
Yeah.
I said, I'm not going to leverage that. We're just doing something we enjoy doing and love doing together. And I said, you know where my church is. You know what time the worship service is. If you want to come, come. If you don't, go to hell. No, I didn't tell him that. I just said, you're welcome anytime you want to go. And you know what? The next Sunday he's there because you took all the oughta, gotta, shoulda out of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a good preacher friend of mine used to say, you know what? I'm tired of being oughta, gotta, and shoulda on. And
Should it on is
should it on is that's it.
kind of the reason for the Schick show.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I want people to come to church when they leave. They find something they could use, and they look at themselves and they say to themselves, this is what God made me to be. This is my purpose in existence, to love God and love one another, and that starts with you being able to forgive and love yourself. And when you make that connection, life begins to flow a whole lot easier, even in the tough times. And so I always had a lot of fun with people being irreligious, and I got to tell you one story quickly.
Gotta know what irreligious is.
Yeah. Okay.
We can't get too far from it.
Many years ago, I was serving a church in Louisiana when I was directing a nationwide television network down there for a couple of years on a special assignment and training youth pastors all over the United States. And I found a church. I liked the pastor, and we hit it off real well. And he said, "Could you make some calls for me?" I said, "Yeah." So I want you to go see this guy named Chester in a nursing home. And so I said, "Okay." And so I went by and knocked on Chester's door, and he was a truck driver for many years, and then he became a dispatcher, and then he became like the head honcho for this trucking corporation. And I knocked on the door and stuck my head up and in, and he looked at me and he said, "What the hell do you want?" And I said, I want to. I came by to see you." And he said, "Well, who the hell are you?" You know, truck driver
Yeah.
language. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
every other word out of his mouth was a cuss word, you know. And I finally looked at Chester, you know, to get past that crusty facade. And I looked at him and I said, "Well, damn it, I'm your pastor. Shut up. Let me visit with you for a while, you know." He just cracked up laughing. He
Yeah.
had esophageal cancer and he died a few months later. And but I used as many implicatives as I could in his funeral because I said, you know, this was the language of truck drivers, and I want to celebrate his life the way he'd want to be celebrated. I said he didn't cuss to be a big guy. He cussed because that's the way he talked.
That was his language.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, if you can speak people's language and they get to see you as real,
Yeah.
then what happens is you make a connection and they'll listen to what you have to say.
Man, you just hit on that relationship thing. It's like you're reading my questions I wrote down. I'm a big believer in the relationship. I'm a big believer in, you know, that's the real prize is the relationship you build with one another. Us sitting here today and just sharing,
Yeah.
and you know this is a vehicle to share out with. Potentially, you know, I don't know what the potential is.
At least 10 people.
At
Well,
least
yeah.
15. Yeah. I think I've got 14 right now, and I'm going to listen to this one later to get that 15.
I want to say go for it.
That's
Yeah.
right. But, you know, just to share and to help people understand that, you know, gosh, man, that person that you see, you know, especially bringing you in, I brought a lot of different people in, and I want to continue to do that, just to see just a normal guy.
Yep.
You know, no different than anybody else, and that relationship is where the real prize is. when we avoid that, or we put a label on something, you know, when we
Oh, yeah.
decide these preconceived notions before we have a chance to actually talk and get to know each other, I think we really shortchange ourselves in how special life can really be. You know, for many years, I've all my life, I don't know if there's ever been a time when I didn't believe in the relationship.
Right.
I didn't understand why.
Right.
Didn't totally get it. But I can remember as a kid, just a little guy. It was always about the relationship then too. I love people. So
You know, it's interesting when you look at relationships. I told my people at my church many, many, many times, you know, listen, if God's forgiven you, the worst is past. All of that's gone in God's eyes. You know, He removed it because He has the capacity, the capability to be able to do it. And all your sins, past, present, and future, are forgiven. Could you imagine living in the context of having a relationship with someone that you're already forgiven even before you screw up? You know, it's done. You know, that was always my relationship with God that I wanted to share with other people. When you accept the grace and the forgiveness of God, you know, the Bible says, therefore there is no condemnation or judgment. All that passed on to Christ. And so we come into the presence of God, we'll never know condemnation or judgment as a believer because it's all been taken away. And we can enjoy God without backing up into His presence.
in my mind, I'm picturing that.
Yeah.
So, you guys can't see me here. Maybe one of these days I'll do video, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not ready for that yet. I have a face for podcasting and radio. But as you were saying that, backing into, all I can think is, you know, that person standing behind you, just waiting for you to bump into them, be like to startle you. And that's what I was seeing in my head. You were just painting that picture for me. And yeah, well, I appreciate that. I think that's critical for people to hear. Is
Yeah.
but we can do that too.
Yeah.
We
We can give people grace.
we can we can
know.
choose to do that.
We can love on people because most of the time they don't get that kind of unconditional love and forgiveness. It's the sort of oughta, gotta, shoulda world, and your job is to please me. That's the way the world lives. When you look at when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, before they sinned, there was no selfish nature in human beings, nor no sin in the world. Adam and Eve introduced a selfish nature, and people say, well, what is that sin nature or selfish nature that we're all born with? Because we're born as fallible, fallen human beings. And I said, if I asked you to come over and help me cut maybe 6 or 8 cords of firewood, you'd probably say, well, let me filter that through whether I want to or not. Every time somebody wants something from us, we filter it through self. And that self determines whether we're going to do it or not, whether we want to sacrifice ourselves, whether we want to give ourselves away, whether it's our time or effort or energy or knowledge or money, our relationship or whatever. And I said, we'll fight that selfish nature all of our life. We're never done with it because we always filter that old manner of life that we're programmed by. People call me up and say, Gary, you want to go do this? And I got to think, do I want to do it or not? It's the question of what can I do for you rather than do I want to do it, And I tell people, one of the great things about heaven one day is there will be no sin and selfish nature in heaven. We will not filter everything we do through our own self or selfish nature. And that is an incredible amount of freedom, to be free from self. Not from knowing who you are, but being completely free from a selfish desire to protect ourselves, our time, our person, our money, our resources. And everybody on earth struggles with that fallen selfish nature. And God gives us a way out and a way to live above and beyond that nature.
As you're talking about this, all I can think about is Facebook, social media, and just how critical many are. Not all, but many are very critical of one another. Heaven forbid we post something about asking if the ice cream machine is working or not at McDonald's. We know it's not.
Right, yeah.
Do we have to ridicule that person on Hartford City Happenings for asking the question? Do we have to do that? And you're just talking about that filter. And boy, we could sure use some filtering between. I think many of us, they're not going to say that in person.
No.
They're not going to say that to someone in person. They're going to look them dead in the eye and go, are you seriously asking? I probably would. Are you seriously asking if the ice cream machine is working at McDonald's again?
Right.
It's not.
Yeah, right.
But I'm gonna say that in a forgiving way. But boy, it sure gets vicious on social media.
In a social media world, everybody has enmity, where they don't know who I am. They can't get to me.
Right.
There's no recourse or consequences other than going to Facebook jail or whatever, and you have to say some pretty ugly stuff. And I don't want to get into politics because we'll lose 14 of the 15 in your audience.
Well, 14 of the 13 anyway. No, it's very interesting how you're just talking about that filter, and I think we do a very good job for the most part. I work very hard at being thoughtful in what comes out of my mouth next. And, you know, in this format, I have some forgiveness. If I say something that I don't want out there, I can
Right.
go back and edit. But if Gary says something he doesn't want out there, I won't go edit that.
That's right. That's okay with me. That's right. Yeah, you know.
I remind my listeners all the time, I don't edit much.
That's
It's
right.
very
Right.
rare.
Well, you know, I've been known to be wrong before, you know, and if I don't remember it, my wife reminds me,
That's right.
you know, and
I got to tell everybody, the first thing Gary said today at my house, I told him I just got done eating, and that I'd used some hot honey on. I was trying to make a Mexican meal, you know, like tacos. My wife was coming home from work, just trying to make her something, and so I made this ground chicken with some taco seasoning and put some hot and spicy honey on there. He said, "Sounds like my wife." Hot and spicy. It's like,
amen.
man, that's how we keep it going for many years, right there, right? Just to
That's right.
continue to compliment each other and have fun. And so my I got to get to some questions.
Go ahead.
We could be here all night. I can feel it. Like I'm in the pocket, folks. So, where are you from originally?
I grew up on the eastern shore of Maryland.
Okay.
That's what's called the peninsula, the
There's a hint of Southern.
Delmarva Peninsula. Yeah, and it's 3 hours from the Washington Baltimore Beltway, 7 hours from New York, 2 hours down to Virginia Beach. But the Chesapeake Bay is on the one side, and the Atlantic Ocean is on the other. And so we grew up in a farming community, small towns. Went to high school in a town of about 5,000, and but we had opportunity to spend time in the ocean, surfing. My brother and I, fishing, hunting. You know, we had horses, we had cattle, we had hogs, we had 40 head of standardbred racehorses.
Oh my gosh.
Dad had a sand and gravel business, and we put up about 15,000 bales of hay and straw a year for all the critters. And
That'll make you
you
grow up
know,
real quick, right
I
there.
came home from college and I told Dad, I said, you know, Dad, you taught us how to work hard. You just never taught us how to like it, you know. And but it was a wonderful place to grow up. You know, you could go anywhere by yourself at any time. I had 16 first cousins, and, you know, we all got together every week or so and played together and lived together. And so a lot of family and a lot of small towns. And if you screwed up, you know, Mom and Dad had a phone call on the landline before you got home.
That's right.
And you walked in the house and Mom would say, "Did you do that?" And I was like, yeah. And my mother was a smoker, and she died at 69 of throat cancer, but she smoked all her life. But she would sit in a lazy boy chair in the den where you enter the house, and my brother and I would sneak up to the house at night if we were late or we've been doing some stuff we shouldn't have been doing. And we figured the word had filtered out by then, and we'd peek in the window, and if Mom's cigarette was really burning brightly and repeatedly really fast, she was pissed. You know, she was going for it. But she was sort of laid back, taking a drag every minute or so. Then we would just march right on the house because we knew okay. But we had to make sure we had our story straight before we went in the house when Mom was mad, you know. So, but it was a great place to live and grow up on between the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean, and with family and friends and small townism. So
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. Makes me just think about, there was a lady in our neighborhood. Her name was Kim Collett. And she'd see me riding my bikes around with the buddies or whatever. And she'd go, "Scott, I'm going to tell your mom I saw you smoking." I wasn't smoking. I wasn't smoking. I saw that. I saw you smoking. It was just that reminder that there's someone watching.
yeah, neighborhood had her eyes on you. That's right.
Always, you know. And
Yeah.
my mom was, you know, a daughter of the town and knew everyone. And I didn't mess around.
Yeah.
Well, at least, you know, where people could see, you know.
Well, one of my worst mistakes, my cousin and I would, his dad had a service station and we worked there in the summer and pumped gas and we worked on cars on nights and weekends and we were gearheads and built quarter mile race cars and
Yeah.
would go up and we'd tear up our whole salary on a Saturday night and work all week long to fix it to go back up again on another Saturday, on another Saturday night. But I built a '57 Chevy and painted it vitamin C orange, and it was a huge mistake because in 10 counties there was only one vitamin
Only
C
one.
orange '57 Chevy, and that was scary, and oh my God, I wanted to paint the thing black after a few months. Yeah.
Everybody had a black one. Yeah. I had a ZX10, a crotch rocket when I was
Ooh.
20, 21, and that thing was loud.
Mm.
It was, of course, had to be loud,
Mm-hmm.
and it was fast. And there's no doubt my mom had to be going, oh, there he goes again. Because we lived a block off the highway. Back then, you'd cruise the strip, right?
Yeah.
So back in the 90s, or 80s and 90s, we're cruising the strip, and I would come up out of A&W, and I'd just get all over it. We only live like 3 blocks from A&W, Gary. Three blocks.
You were just telegraphing it. Yeah.
100%. And I come flying up through there on one wheel, going 80 mile an hour and in between cars right down the highway. Like, I was invincible.
Yeah. Yeah. Bulletproof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found out later you're immortal, not invincible. I came off that thing one time. But yeah, I mean, my mom knew. My mom knew. There's no way she didn't,
Yeah. Yeah.
I hear people, and I live, a mile off the highway, and I can hear motorcycles. She knew,
Yeah.
parents know, people know, and they're going to tell. Oh my gosh, that just reminds me. One time, my brother and I had this old Chevy pickup truck. I had a '66 C10. It was hot rodded up. My brother had a motorcycle, and we hot rod through town. Or it might have been the Cadillac. I can't remember now, but we're hot rod through town. And I don't know if you know Johnny Amos.
In town here?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We seen him somewhere. I think we might have seen him out at the deli out on the north end of town. And he said, I'm going to tell your mom. You guys are racing. We were too. But Johnny's even going to tell my mom.
There you go.
no
You get
escape,
tattled on
man.
by everybody. That's right. Yeah.
My mom didn't smoke.
yeah,
She would sit up. Jennifer's mom would sit up too. You would know when you came in late.
Yeah.
Uh,
After a while, we went to the adjoining small towns where nobody knew us, So you didn't get quite as much trouble,
I was never that smart. I was afraid I was
You
going to get
may
in trouble in
beat
another
up
town.
for dating some of the other local girls, but that was about the size of it. Yeah.
My fear was I didn't know all the police that needed to. That's awesome. 43 years. In those 43 years, I can't get over it. That's a journey. That's a journey.
A long time.
The boy I was talking to a few weeks ago, he's 14, and I thought, one thing I've always talked to my students about is, what are you going to do when you're, in your 20s? What do you want to do when you get older? And here they are, 13, 14 years old. They're still thinking about what they did when they were 8.
Right.
They're not thinking about 25 with kids and going to college and everything, all those responsibilities, or, having a job and apprenticeships. They're not, they have no idea.
They're not there yet.
Just thinking about that. If somebody would have said, Gary, this is all you got to do to get your doctorate, how long would you have,
Right.
I mean, but once you're in it, you're making that commitment,
Right.
and I'm not going back.
Yeah.
Heck no, man. I'm in it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do all that work for nothing. But I'm just thinking 43 years. I'm not a 43-year guy.
Oh, there you go.
I'm not a 43-year guy, man.
Well, I remember one church I was serving. Some of my churches were not long term. They didn't want me there that long either, but that's okay. One church I was serving, we had a guy that was on my board. I was there 8 years, and every opportunity we had to make a difference in the community, in lives, in young families for the kingdom, he said no. We had monthly board meetings, and for 8 years, he never said yes. And when I left, they had a little going away celebration, and he came up to me and says, "Gary, we didn't always get along." And I looked at him and said, "We never got along. It wasn't a question of ever getting along. We never got along." I said, "You never made a yes decision in 8 years. There's something wrong there, you know?" And I said, "I got to tell you something." I said, "I've been praying for your funeral for about 7 years." And oh my God, his reaction was, like, "What?" And I said, "Yeah,
no.
man, you're a miserable human being. You make your wife miserable, your children miserable, you make your church miserable. You're never positive, upbeat, forward thinking, looking at the choices and stuff that could be for the lives of others. You're just going to look at if it can inconvenience you." And so, yeah, I prayed a long time for your funeral. He said, "That's the worst thing in the world I ever heard." And I said, "Hey, the church would be better off. You would be in heaven. You would be happy. And leadership here would be a whole lot better. And the funny thing was, 2 months later, I went to this new church and I received the old church newsletter, the monthly church newsletter in the mail, and it showed where he died.
Oh gosh.
Oh my God. And all I could think about saying to God is, "You could have done this a lot sooner. Come on, Lord. But he kept me on a hotline to God every month. But I always had a bit of a sacrilegious or irreligious or, not the let's, wear the three-piece suit, white shirt and tie.
Yeah.
After 7 years of pre-Christian into everything there was, I wanted people to be real and enjoy God.
Authentic.
Yeah. And I'd go into hospitals and visit people, and you'd go into hospital and you sit down with them, and they're complaining about everything in the world. "Oh my God, this place is horrible. And, the nurses are horrible. The doctors are horrible. The food's horrible. The medicine's horrible. My wife doesn't understand me. My kids don't come see me." And, yada, yada, yada. Just let them vent. And then I just take their hand. I said, "Let's pray." I said, "Okay, Pastor, appreciate you praying for me." I said, "Well, hey, prayed yet?" And that was a cue. They should have taken that cue, and said, "Pastor, don't pray for me." And I just take their hand and say, "Lord, so-and-so and so-and-so is miserable. Instead of them getting them well, I'm going to pray that you'll just go ahead and take them on home." And oh my God, they'd snatch their hand out of yours and like, "No, I didn't want you to pray like that." I said, "Life's miserable for you. I want you to be happy in heaven." And a week later, you go visit them in a hospital, and you walk into their hospital room, and you look at them and you say, "How are you today?" And you know what they say? "Hey, I'm getting better, and the nurses are getting better, and the doctors are getting better, and my wife's getting better, and I'm really looking forward to getting out of here and going on with life." And what they're really saying is, "I don't want you to pray that I die again. But it got their attention in a way that they could refocus and reprioritize their life. And that doing what people would see as irreligious in the religious world was not seen as irreligious in the non-Christian world or the unchurched world. We had a Palm Sunday service many years ago, and it wasn't at the church. We held it at the school, and my leadership team said, "What are we going to call it?" And I said, "We're going to call it Wild Ass Sunday." Like, what? These were people with a church background, half of them, and they're just dying. We can't call church Wild Ass Sunday. You're crazy. And I said, "Listen, the Bible says, it's in the book. The Bible says that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a wild colt, on a wild donkey. What do we call a donkey? We call him an ass, And he was wild. He was never been tamed. And Jesus put a blanket on the back of him, and rode him 3 miles from Bethany into Jerusalem, and the daggone donkey never bucked him off once, you know? And I said, so we're going to have Wild Ass Sunday. We're going to invite everybody to Wild Ass Sunday. People came in and they're like, I mean, hundreds of people,
Yeah.
because they wanted to know. Word got around. We're having Wild Ass Sunday. You know,
What
is this is this like a wet T-shirt night? Is this what's going on here? And we told the story, which in church is pretty tame, called Palm Sunday. And Jesus rode the donkey into Jerusalem.
Right.
Well, there's a lot more drama to it than that.
Sure.
I said, you know what? When Jesus jumped on the back of that wild ass, his presence calmed that beast.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and Jesus rode him for 3 miles into Jerusalem, and he was tame. We told the story, and I said, you know what? God can tame your wild ass. Now that's funny, and it's irreligious, but it's the actual story of taking a wild creature and bring it to a place of peace and civility with itself, with its owner, with its surrounding, and with the Lord of the universe. And I said, you turn the Lord of the universe into your life and let him run your life instead of you, you won't be wild anymore. And you'll enjoy life. And so, doing stuff like that that's out there on the edge was coming up with those creative cutting edge that unchurched people would come because they just were curious. People came and listened to Jesus preach because they were curious. Did he really feed those 5,000 people? I don't know if he really fed those. Did he walk on water? I don't know if I'm going to go see it for myself, and, and
He did tame a wild ass.
that's right, baby. So you'll never look at that story again, or you may never want to read that story again, so, but, oh my God.
So what's the toughest part? What's the toughest part of being a pastor of a church, to being that leader of those people?
Praying for a lot of church people to go to heaven. That's
Yeah.
there are people that have grown up in church all their life, and they're great people. They've got great character. They've made great decisions in life. They've had a good moral compass, with the scripture. They have a relationship with God. But when church is about church, you've missed the purpose of church. The purpose of church was to reach the people that are not churched. Which came first, the mission of Christ or the church of God, church of Christ? The mission came before the church. And most people, not all, but most people in church want to make decisions around what is good for the church, which is what is good for us in the church. That's the most difficult hurdle to overcome, is to get them to realize and look beyond themselves. I mean, they suffer from a narcissism of church. The purpose, I went to a church one time and they said, well, your job here is to make us happy. And I said, well, you're going to be a lot of disappointed people here, because that's not my job. If you're happy, it's because you choose to be happy. But my job is to share the message of Christ with this community of about 300 people here. And I went around and knocked on every door, all 300 homes in the 3 years I was there, and I watched the church go from about 35 to 100. I invited church people to go with me, and they wouldn't go with me. Because the purpose of church was to be church. When you're doing church and being church, that's different than participating with Christ in the mission of the church. When the mission of the church precedes the formation of the church, then you are truly the church. But when the purpose of people sitting down in the pew is for you to take care of them and babysit them until they die, or I pray you to heaven, then you've missed it. You know,
Sure.
I showed up one Sunday in a church, sort of a downtown kind of church, with a Hawaiian shirt, khaki shorts, and tennis shoes. And these people are used to three-piece suits and a robe, you know, and an ordination of stole with doctorate chevrons, you know, on the sleeves and this kind of crap, you know. And I show up in a Hawaiian shirt and khaki shorts. And one of the little old ladies comes up to me after the service, and she said, "Did you get them clothes at Goodwill?" He was a mean old cuss. And I said, "You know what? We shop at the same place." Gosh, she cavalierly turned on her heel and walked out, and she never really wanted to speak to me again after that, you know. But getting people to think beyond themselves. Jesus never thought about himself. He didn't have a selfish nature. Sometimes the church is a group of people with a selfish nature. And they want to take care of everybody in the church and themselves. And they got blinders onto the fact that 60% of our culture doesn't go to church. Probably 65, 70% may not even be believers. But when they show up on Sunday morning or Wednesday or have meetings or whatever, all they're thinking about is their little circle, and it doesn't get any bigger than that. That's the toughest part of ministry, is to refocus people's orientation to understand that the mission came before the church. And in a local church, if the mission doesn't come before the church, whoever's there when they die, you don't have that quote church anymore, because you never took care of the true mission of the church.
I had a mantra at one time. I may be perceiving this wrong, but it sounds very similar. That I believed that I had to change behavior before I changed belief. In those that I was working with, you know, if I can get you to start doing the right things, then your belief
Right.
comes along with that. And I feel that with what you're saying is, you know, hey, instead of being your center being here, why don't we think about our why
Right.
rather than our what?
Right.
You know, what am I rather than why am I? And I think about the why when I do something. Why am I doing this? What's the big picture
Right.
rather than what am I doing? The
Right.
what's pretty simple.
Right.
You know, I mean, we can write that on my whiteboard and here's what I'm doing.
Right.
But the why is very difficult to define sometimes. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't, because I think it is so big for what you have done. I think that why is very big. You know, but it's also very simple. It's not big.
You know, I'll give you an illustration. Each year in Indianapolis, we had an annual conference where all the pastors and lay leaders from hundreds and hundreds of churches in Indiana came together to make the decisions on the for the next year, for the purpose, the mission, what they wanted to accomplish, the agendas and stuff like that. And I was at an annual conference one year, and it was a bit boring for me, a little, you know. But I was raised as an evangelist, so you know, talking about some of the nuts and bolts wasn't really exciting. It's necessary,
Sure.
but you know, it doesn't spark a whole lot of interest and joy and fire in me. And I went over to the local hotel because I had to run some papers off because I was still working full time, and we'd started the commercial construction venture, and so I had to send some paperwork off. And I went over to this Kinko's inside the bottom basement of this hotel, had a business office, and I asked the lady if she could run me some copies, and she said, yeah. And then, can you fax them? You know, after I fill them out, we were on a lunch break, and I just looked at her and I said, "Hey, where do you go to church?" And she said, "I don't go to church." She said, "Now my boss, that lady over there, she goes to church." And about that time, she drifted over to the conversation. And I said, "Where do you go to church?" And she said, ABC Kingdom Church, whatever it was. And I said, "Have you ever invited this lady to church?" Kinko's got real quiet. No. I said, "Have you ever shared the love of God with her?" No. And I said to her, I said to the lady waiting on me, I said, "Have you ever considered becoming a Christian?" And she said, "I've thought about what it means to be a Christian a few times," but she said, "There's some other things that I want to do in life that really doesn't match up with being a Christian." I said, "Okay, I'm not going to ask you to enumerate those. And I said, "Let me ask you a question. If you put all of those things that you want to do on one side of a scale and you put an eternity with God on the other side of the scale," I said, "which you think will carry the most weight in eternity?" And she said, "That's a no-brainer." She said, "All the things that I think I want to do that doesn't match Christianity, Christianity would win in a heartbeat." And I said, "If that's true, then what is stopping you from becoming a Christian?" She said, "Nothing." I said, "Would you like to be a Christian?" And we prayed right there in Kiko's, and she gave her life to Christ. And I turned to her manager and I said, "Okay, it's your job to help disciple her, teach her, and walk with her and encourage her as a new believer." And then I went back and sat for another 6 hours in a boring ass meeting, and I thought, what would happen if the thousands of people here at this meeting
Right.
were out there witnessing to people in downtown Indianapolis?
Right.
What kind of difference could we make in our world? And that brings me back to the point where what's more important, the mission of the church or the church?
Mm-hmm.
When 99% of our energy and passions are given over to the promulgation of the institution, and nothing or 1% is given to the mission of the church. And most of the time that's the foreign missions, because we don't want people in Haiti and Africa and South America to go to hell. So we'll give them a little bit of money so that they can, maybe make it into the kingdom. But the person who's down the street,
Right.
I'm not really concerned about their eternal destiny, and I'm not willing to sacrifice my time and energy to try to make a difference in their life. When my kids were growing up, one thing I instilled in all of them is you have a right to make your own choices. But for every choice you make, there's consequences or results. So I said, when they got to be 10, 8, 9, 10, I said, you're going to make your decisions from now on. That's not my job. We've given you a foundation. We've given you a faith. We've given you a moral compass. We've taught you what character is. We've exemplified it in our lives. But you're going to run those decisions by us. And so they would come and say, "Hey, I think I want to do A, B, C, or D." I'd say, "Okay, now, if you do A, B, C, or D, let's say take A, what's going to happen when you make that decision?" And they start walking it out. And I said, "Okay, you do that, and this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and this is where you end up." I said, "Is this where you want to end up?" "Well, no, Dad, I don't want to end up there." I said, "Then, you know what? Go back and make another decision. And let's talk about it, and let's walk it out and see where it ends up. And if that's where you want to go, and I can agree with you, then I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader." but I don't want you to walk out there and get there and say, why did Dad let me go do this? I don't believe in education, by two befores, and I'd much rather have them think through it. Now my kids have a lot of friends that didn't have parents that helped them make long-term decisions, think through it, walk it out before they did it. And, I remember all my kids coming home and say, Dad, what's wrong with my friends? They don't know how to make good decisions. And I think that's the greatest legacy you can leave a church. You can leave your children, you can leave in the world, is to help people look at the long term, make good decisions, walk it out. And when they get there, they're excited about where they are. They're proud of where they are, and they see the difference that decision is going to make in their world.
There's no doubt in my mind you have changed and improved many, many lives in your years, Gary. And I know you've had an impact on me and my family. And
I've probably pissed off as many other people
I'm
too.
sure you have. I mean, that's
okay,
part of it, right? I mean, even when you're praying for them to go to heaven, that's
you won't ever forget that. That's right. Yeah.
I taught my daughter a lesson years ago that, listen, we can tell somebody we learned a lot from you.
Right. Yeah. Good, bad, or ugly. That's right.
I learned a lot from you, and I've said that to folks, and I've meant it as I've learned a lot from you, and I've meant it as I've learned a lot from you. It's kind of like where's the comma at? Let's eat, Grandma.
Right.
Or let's eat, Grandma. Commas are important, my friend.
Absolutely.
So just I want to wrap up, but gosh, we didn't even talk about knives.
No. So
we're gonna save that for another one.
Okay.
We're gonna do this again.
We could do that.
And we're not even scratching the surface of the Gary Hall, Dr. Gary Hall. I'm gonna start calling you Dr. Hall now.
Okay, that's okay. You've been wrong before.
I've had a great time, my friend.
Thank you for the invitation.
Man, I'm so glad. I passed by your house a couple times, and I told Jennifer it's probably a month ago. I said, when I get home, we were on our way to Muncie, and I said, hey, when I get home, don't let me forget. I saw you out mowing. I said, don't let me forget to call, send Gary a message, see if he'll come on the podcast. She goes, okay. By the time you get home, I'd forgotten to get gas. I'd forgotten to call Gary. I'd forgotten to go to Walmart like we were going to, or wherever we were going. Nobody forgets to go to Walmart.
That's right.
You're praying that you don't have to go to Walmart.
Yeah.
But then the other day we're coming by again, and I just looked over and I seen your property over there, and I said, I get home, I'm calling Gary. I'm gonna send him a message, and I'm glad I did. And thanks so much for taking the time. And it's what you're saying, like exactly what you said. We have to decide that it's worth it. That I started this podcast with the belief that it's worth sharing my life experiences with others, and then finding others to come in and share their life experiences. Whether my 12 listeners now believe get it or disagree or something, I hope they get something.
Right.
Just get past yourself long enough to get something from what I share, what Gary shares, what my other guests have shared, and just pick up that one little nugget, and it's worth it. We used to go to coaching clinics, like you were saying, you're going to and those coaching clinics. I always thought if I can just bring back one drill, it was worth my time.
Yeah.
Just to associate with others that have a passion for something, and to get to bring back that one nugget that might change one of my players' seasons or career as a softball player or whatever, basketball player. It was worth it. If it gives me an opportunity to learn one more thing to make me a better coach, a better leader, a better human being, then it was worth it. And that's what I hope my listeners get from all of this, is just one little nugget. That's all you need. Maybe if you're having a bad day and you hear one cute, stupid story that makes it a little bit better. And that's what I'm hoping.
They'll all be looking for Wild Ass Sunday on churches.
Wild Ass Sunday. Just Jesus taming that wild ass.
That's
You gotta
funny
be
stuff.
careful,
That's right.
My friend, thank you so much.
Thank you, my brother.
Guys,
God bless.
ladies, gentlemen, thank you for listening and putting up with us. This has been an hour and 25-ish minutes. That's a lot. I mean,
A lot of time.
it is a lot of time, but it's time well spent. You know, what else are you going to be doing? Sitting in the car, sitting on the mower, taking a jog, a walk, whatever. And like you were saying, it's junk in, junk out, and what we listen to is really a big deal. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you. We're out.